Hi, I'd like to share my journal for the Nick the Booksmith Deserted Island Challenge. And I'd first like to begin by saying that this was a wonderful, fun challenge, and I totally enjoyed it. I also enjoyed seeing everyone's journals, videos. It was quite nice. So Nick has given us 4 items that we can use in our journal. We have to choose a glue, and for that I've chosen the fabric tack, a string, and for that I've chosen a heavy-duty upholstery thread and a heavy-duty needle. I also chose my favorite pair of scissors, that I generally use for fussing cutting because it's good with paper as well as fabric. And I'm using tea-stained paper. We also have 4 chosen items, any items that we would like to choose to create our journal. And to begin, I chose a priority mail box, and this became known as the soggy box, as I described it as something that had washed up on the shore when I came to this island. I also have a 12 by 12 square of a floral fabric, very brightly floral, that has nice foliage on it and wonderful flowers that I thought would enhance this journal. I also have a 12 by 12 piece of Tim Holtz paper, and that paper had 4 squares that represented the paper that was included in that collection. I chose it not only for the pictures, which were, very nice and florally. I also chose it because it had several different backgrounds that also I felt would enhance a journal. I also chose some distress ink and a daba, and the ink is a tea-stained color. And in giving us all the information for the challenge, Nick told us to be careful with our choices, to make good choices, because what we decided for our 4 chosen items was all that we would have, and we would have to make our journal and settle for those items only. I had an idea. In the end, it did come out okay, but I felt that I maybe didn't make the right choice in not choosing a pencil or a pen or any kind of a marker that I could draw and that I could write what I wanted into this journal. So here is my journal, and this is the journal I have created. I was able to peel the paper off of the corrugated. It came off quite easily because it was soggy. And I reserved a part of it to use, and I glued some of the fabric onto the cover. I wrapped it around to the back of the cover, and I tucked small pieces inside each of the covers in front and back. I made a map. I wanted to show that there were 6 islands where I finally found safety on an island, and I marked the one item to let anyone know where I had landed. I named my journal Lost because that was the feeling that I had when I first came to the island. I felt very, very lost at sea. I made a band out of the same corrugated material from the box. I fussy cut some of the flowers out from the fabric, and I mounted the fabric and glued it to some of the tea stain paper to make it a little bit stiff, give it some stability, and this way when the band went on and off, it wouldn't fold and tuck into the band as I was moving it up and down the journal. In the back, where the two pieces met, I added a piece of foliage for a nice, neat look in the back, and you know, that kind of looked very pretty with the front of the cover. And so I broke my journals down into days, and this is day 1, and you see that I have stitched the letters, and I did the words by stitching the words onto the paper. What I did was take my needle, I made holes in the paper and wrote the letters, and then I went back and I sewed in those holes, much like the old sewing cards that we did when we were children. The tough part of that is that I couldn't control the size because I didn't have a ruler and because I didn't have a pencil or a pen or a marker. So I had to wing it. And sometimes I wrote the words and they were small and got larger. Sometimes they started out large and got smaller. So needless to say, I wrote the words many, many times. The word explorer was more difficult, and after doing it 4 times, I decided that the best way to approach this was to take each letter individually and sew it, and therefore, if it wasn't to my liking, I was only discarding a letter and not the entire word, and I think that it turned out pretty nice. It gave it a little nicer look, kind of a country look. And on the front, inside of the front cover, I also wrapped the piece of fabric around to continue it into the journal. I also made a type of a stencil, and you can see the light going through the holes that I pierced in the paper, and this way I was able to put this down onto paper and make a couple of the word day as I designated them in my journal. You can see on the back, all right, the way that looked, but it helped me along. It helped it go a little smoother and go a little quicker, and it also looked very nice sitting in on the tag. I took the extra pieces, and there were a lot, and I put them on another tag, just a little bit of a decorative thing. I wasn't going to let them go to waste. I had a lot of letters, big and small, and I thought I would use them as a decorative piece. So my first order of business was to find some things on the island that I could use to make my life a little more comfortable there, a little bit better there. And they found items that I listed. The first one was a cozy spot, and that was on the beach where I was able to build a campfire. The fire itself took quite a bit of work from my Girl Scout days. I remember trying to start a fire with a piece of wood and some tinder, and of course, um, that sounds a lot easier than it actually is. That could take hours to accomplish that. But I did get a fire started, and I was pleased with that. And every time I made an accomplishment like that, I felt a little bit safer on the island. I was lucky to find a grove of palm trees. I collected coconuts that were already on the ground, and there were plenty of them. And I, at that point, didn't know how I was going to get them open, but I figured I'd find a rock and I'd figure out a way. I also saw wonderful, wonderful birds on the island, beautiful birds, and I certainly enjoyed seeing the very, very colorful birds, and I knew that they would be fun to watch while I waited to be rescued. I did see many nests. I did see them filled with eggs, but at this point in time, I didn't intend to disturb any of those nests and take any of those eggs for myself. After 30 years of being a florist, I was definitely very interested in the flowers that were growing in the on the island, and so a lot of the tags that I made were about flowers, and I would wait until I got home until I identified the flowers and wrote about the flowers that I had seen. Um, and I enjoyed making my journal on the island. It gave me something to do. It kept me occupied, and I did know that I would be rescued because it was a Disney cruise. They knew who was on the cruise. They knew where the ship was in trouble, and they knew about the islands in the area. So I knew it was just a matter of time, and I decided that I would just enjoy my stay here and use my time to just have a good time. On day 2, I decided that I needed to make some tools, and so I gathered some feathers, I gathered some shells, and I chose some broken shells that were sharp, that were good for cutting, and that I would fashion into some small tools to help me with anything that I might need. I also gathered some berries. I noticed that there were some dark blueberries, and they were berries that the birds didn't eat, and so I knew that they were not edible berries. But I collected some of them, and I thought maybe I would try to make some ink. And so I figured it was worth a try, and with the feathers I could make a quill, and then I would have some ink, and then I would have something that I could write with and not have to, sew every word that I wanted to use in my journal. At that point, I was very, very concerned about my needle. I knew if I lost my needle, it was a very, very valuable tool, so it became a priority to make sure that I had a place to put my needle away after I used it each time. And I made this little envelope, and I put the needle in here. It's been my experience all the years that I've done sewing, and that halfway through the project you always wind up losing the needle, and of course at home you've got lots more, so that's easy. Here I have this one needle, I have this one shot, and if I lose that, I will lose everything. So that was neatly tucked away and safely kept from harm. On day 2, I also had to build myself some kind of structure, some place to live, where I was sheltered from the rain and the wind, someplace where I could sleep. And as I collected different items around, like the coconuts, I could leave, in one spot. The fire was in front of me, and so it became a cozy spot to sit and relax. And I made myself some tags out of the paper that eventually I would be able to write some thoughts and some ideas on the tags. I also decided to make an island map. That was very, very important. It was a small island. There were some low mountains, not really anything very tall or very dangerous. Just small mountain area. There was a nice lake there, very pretty, very serene. There was a nice grove of palm trees, which I had collected my coconuts from. My campfire is noted its position on the island, and a grove of trees, which was small. All right, it was a little island, and there were no animals on the island that I was able to find, just the birds. There were some rocks, and that helped me as well open those coconuts, because at that point the coconuts were all that I had to eat. And I made a small key to all the items that I had sewn into my map. On day 3, I decided that it was more than coconut that I wanted to eat. And so I resigned myself to the fact that I was going to have to figure out a way to get some fish. And the catch of the day would become my menu, or my only menu for the day. I also made myself some stationery that eventually I had hoped to make some ink, and I would be able to write. So it was successful. I was able to catch some fish, and I thought about the deserted island diet. All right, might be a fun thing to talk about when I got home. A diet of coconuts and fish forever would be an interesting diet, but certainly if I was here on any length of time, I would be going home a very different person. I had to spear fish because I didn't have a fishing pole. I didn't have, of course, any hooks to fish with, so I had to spear my fish, which I once saw in a movie, and I was surprised I was able to do it, and it worked, and it was looked like at least I wasn't going to starve on this island. And of course, bugs. Wherever you go, there are bugs. I was in Hawaii. There really weren't a lot of bugs in Hawaii. I very seldom saw a bug in Hawaii. And I figured out why, and it was because they were all on this island. There were more bugs than you could possibly imagine. And I was happy that Tim Holtz had given me a little chart of bugs, but I didn't see any of those bugs here. So I really didn't know if any of the bugs that were on the island would sting or bite, or what would happen. But You could always depend on bugs. I also made myself a small book, and that also, if ever I had an opportunity to make some ink from those berries, which was part of my plan for the next day, I would have a little diary that I could record some of the things that I was finding on that island. And as I reflected on the past couple of days, all right, I went to my mantra, something that I repeated quite often in my life, that everything happens for a reason. And so I sat and went with my quiet thoughts, and I went within to try to figure out what it was that I was supposed to be seeing or learning here while I was on this island. I was quite surprised that it wasn't the awful experience that I expected it to be, that I was actually enjoying my time there. I did create some letters, some papers, and hoped that I would eventually be able to make some ink and be able to write. And somehow I managed to skip a page, so I apologize, but I do have to go back, and because it's an integral part of the story. So while I was making tools and exploring the island, all right, I did find and gather larger feathers that I was able to make quills out of. Of course, with all the lovely birds, there was a large selection of feathers. And that's when I decided that I was going to try my hand at making ink. And this was back in day 2, so now I've got this ink that's been brewing for 2 days. I collected the berries, I added some water to it, I mashed them and strained them, and I left them to ferment in the little coconut shells. And of course it's 2 days, and still the ink has not thickened, and it isn't really good. It will, if I put it on the paper, it will tint the paper, but it has to be thicker in order to be able to write and not have the words spread. So on day number 5, I made a tablet, still very much believing that that ink was going to be, that the ink would eventually reduce and I'd be able to use it to write with. I put it into the campfire to heat it up. I thought maybe if I boiled it a little bit, it would reduce down and thicken a little bit, and then I would have a more intense color and be able to write. But at this point, I didn't, all right? So I worked on this tablet, and I glued quite a bit of paper together so that it was hard, and I would have something to lean on and be ready for that ink when it was ready. I originally thought that this would be one of the uh, I'm sorry. I thought that I would make one of those pages with all the pieces, all right, coming out of the side, the little raggedies, and then decided that I wasn't able to do that because I wouldn't be able to get the band back onto the journal. So I used it to make a collage, and this was all that I had left of all the supplies that I had started with. I saved all the letters and I used them, and I did have some what I called outtakes of the papers that I had pierced with the needle with the intention of uh, sewing them, and of course they came out uneven and crooked. I also wanted to stitch on to the paper, but because the tea stain paper is so brittle, I was unable to do that. The thread that I was using was very, very stiff and very strong, and it easily tore the paper, so I couldn't put any kind of sewing onto the paper. It was easier just to take very small stitches, but it came out nice, and it was um, a nice memento, and no waste uh, in the items that I had chosen. And the envelope that I made to collect my mementos, my leaves, and my flower petals and such, I was able to put into the envelope to take home with me. I made some tags as well that tucked into the back of the envelope. So this way I could identify everything that I had collected. And of course, like everyone else, I kept track of the days. And each night, as the moon came out, I stitch an X, all right, to record the passing of the day. And it wasn't there long, but I felt that a long time had passed. And then I thought I saw a boat, and I realized that I was, in fact, going to be rescued, and the boat was coming in my direction. So I was very, very happy. And I have to also add that the ink never manifested, all right? It didn't really work. And so the last picture that I had left over, also flowers, I thought I would include that in the back of the book as another memento of my wonderful Paradise Island. And then also a little bit of leftover I used to say thank you to Nick for the Deserted Island Challenge. This was certainly fun and a pleasure, and I will look forward to any other challenges from now on. I do have to note that my biggest challenge was making this video. It's my first video. Well, not my first completed video. And so I'm hoping that this comes out okay and I can post it. I did have one before this, and somehow it split into two videos. And I don't know how that happened, but here we are at 30 minutes. I made it to the end. All right, and I think that that's my biggest accomplishment. And I thank you very much for watching, and I hope everybody enjoyed the challenges. Thank you once again, Nick.